Welcome to Equine-Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest.
Welcome back to Equine-Assisted World. Most of us who work in this field either work with kids or who might have a variety of neurocognitive conditions, sometimes mixed with physical, or young adults with anxiety, young adult autism, that sort of thing, or, perhaps trauma, and also perhaps veterans, but there's a whole other group out there that I think a lot of us don't work with because it's really a specialized thing. And so we're very lucky to have Leana Tank here, who's an occupational therapist from Grand Rapids, Michigan, but also a very accomplished horsewoman and works in the equine assisted field as well. And she works with a population that I think most of us would feel intimidated to work with, let's say, and takes it in her stride. And so I want to delve into Leana's toolbox and, what makes her able to do this and to do it so well. I'm going to let her explain what she does. So without further ado, big drum roll, the amazing Leana Tank, one of my great heroes, actually. You are one of my great heroes, Leana. Can you talk to us about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So thank you for having me here. It's quite an honor to be included. You've had many brilliant, amazing people on this podcast. So it's great to be here. Yeah. I mean, I'll say first off that the population I work with does struggle with some pretty the extreme end of the mental health continuum and the challenges that people can face, in the course of their lives. And that can be a little bit shocking to hear about as just like a regular person. So I just want to validate that and just give people a little bit of a warning or a heads up, like the challenges of the people that I work with are quite extreme. I work in residential behavioral health. So these are programs for people who need 24/7 support in the community, staff support. They come to us from the state psychiatric hospitals, the prison system, criminal justice system. They have different diagnoses like schizophrenia, many on the autism spectrum, personality disorders, cognitive impairments, many, a lot of, they might have dual diagnoses. So they might have schizophrenia and a cognitive impairment and things like that. Many have committed crimes. And so they're part of their treatment, because they have been found not guilty by reason of insanity, is to come and work in our programs. So that's the population of people that I'm working with. And they really are people who are on the margins of society. They really don't have a voice. They're really not talked about. Something I find quite often when I'm meeting people and they're asking me like, oh, what do you do? Who do you work with? And I tell them, people are often not very curious. I don't get a lot of other questions. I think they make people uncomfortable. I think in our culture, we are not great at looking at that darker side of our natures in ourselves or in just the culture in our society. We want to kind of label them as other and as monsters, and we want to send them off to jail. We want to punish them. We want to stick them in the state hospitals or say that they're evil and send them to hell. And they really get defined, I think, by the things that they've done, because it can be pretty extreme. But in my experience, like, they are not what they've done. They're honestly, they're like the most sensitive and vulnerable of all of us. They're kind of the part of our society that is carrying the burden or paying the cost of like the breakdown of our care systems and our kind of social support network. And they are the ones who are growing up in the foster care system. They're the ones born to families that maybe they were exposed to drugs and alcohol in utero, and they were born with a nervous system and a brain that's just wired really differently. And then from the get-go, they're already in these institutions and systems. There are really, really sensitive neurodivergent folks that just get taken advantage of or put in the wrong place at the wrong time. And really, they could be any of us, like any of us are capable of those extremes if we're put in the right set of circumstances, or we're one calamity away from a brain injury or a serious condition that dismantles our ability to regulate ourselves and control our behavior. And I think it is hard for somebody with a brain that is fully in control and capable of managing our fight and flight reactions to understand what it's like to be someone living in the world that doesn't have that same capability. So yeah, like I really want to be able to do them justice and be able to kind of express what's, very, very human, fully unique, creative, interesting, people they are. And I absolutely love working with them. And I find it to be incredibly fulfilling and interesting every day. So yeah, I'm glad to be able to be here and try to be a good advocate for them, try to be a good voice for them, because more and more I see actually less and less of a place for them in our culture. Our culture kind of wants to pretend that they're not there. So
let me play devil's advocate then. I mean, you let slip two words, I think, which were good clues. One was monsters, and the other was extreme. Just to be clear, I don't want to trigger people. Are these people who have done things that society would deem monstrous, or that we would, with good reason, say that's monstrous and extreme? And then, if that's the case, how does the act of doing something monstrous, which perhaps costs somebody else their life and perhaps costs somebody else their life in a horrible way, how does that not define the person who committed the act? I think that's a fair question that many people would ask in that. So whether or not one should ask that question, I think it's a natural question to ask. What do you say to that? Because your perspective is so unique.
yeah, and I've worked with a number of people who have, committed crimes of that level of severity, who have done things like that. For the folks that I'm working with their mental health conditions, often they are in a state of like psychosis or extreme distress when something like that happens. And then they're left really, dealing with the trauma of that event. I will say, humanity is extremely adaptable and extremely resilient. I have worked with people who have been through things, either things they've done or things that they themselves have experienced that are just kind of beyond imagining. And they move on. I think that a big part of healing the trauma of something like that has happened, and I've been able to like witness this process. Like it's been such a privilege to like be part of it and witness it, is moving from being defined by that thing that happened and kind of being always hyper vigilant to reminders of what happened, or you know that guilt, or that having that self-perception colored by those events. And through kind of that healing process, and a lot of it is relationships with somebody who can be very non-judgmental, who can help them see themselves in different ways, and also organize those events and organize kind of what happened and understand it through the lens of how their mental illness affected them, and just trying to find a different perspective on it, see people be able to integrate those events, kind of figure out the lessons that they've learned, figure out how to kind of come into alignment with what happened, and how they are going to use those things to come forward and help others. And honestly, something I've seen several different times, and this is how I know that a person is kind of on that path towards more integration and more healing, is that they will tell me that they want to help others and they want to use what's happened to them to support other people. And they will kind of even take those other people under their wing. They'll be a positive impact on the other people that live in those programs. They'll kind of be a mentor. They will take on that role. So that's something I've seen several times. It's really something, yeah.
I guess so that people can get their head around it, because it's outside most people's experience. Most of us, if we think if someone has done something monstrous and they're locked up, the first, it's usually a Hollywood type of idea that comes in. So I think the first picture that a lot of people would have would be Hannibal Lecter.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hannibal Lecter explains in great clarity and detail, and with a sense of vindication, that he's right for having done what he did and to do what he still wants to do, which of course is what makes him scary, because he's not just that he does these things, but he thinks them through and he plans them and executes them as well. I think it's very difficult for people not to have that idea. And however, as you pointed out, these are people who were actually found not guilty because of their mental conditions. In the English lexicon, English lexicon of British English lexicon of sort of criminal justice, I think what we call that is, if someone it's premeditated, it's malice aforethought. That's the difference between murder and manslaughter, I think, for example. If someone, it was planned out, it was done in cold blood, it was rather than in the heat of the moment somehow, blah, 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 blah. Of course, adding psychosis to this is a whole other thing. And is that something which I think there needs to be a greater understanding of, that psychosis can sort of happen to people, and that when someone is in that psychotic period, they're not who they were when they were not in that thing. And then you also said something which made me prick up my ears, which is that one might be just one calamity away from something that happens to you, that an injury that causes that. And I think you put your finger on something there, because I do know people who sustained head injuries who then went on to do really quite crazy things, and that seemed cruel and uncaring because some part of their brain had been damaged, and this could actually be sort of traced, and traumatic brain injury and criminal behavior. Actually, it's one of these areas that's getting more studied now, but I don't think there's a lot of understanding in wider society. But this, of course, is your bread and butter. Can you just talk to us a little bit about this difference between premeditation and non-premeditation, psychosis and non-psychosis, how you can be one person in one moment and another person in another, traumatic brain injury? I think this is really useful for, particularly for people in our field.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out that people with mental illness are much more likely to be victims of violence than to actually be violent themselves. They are like I just saw these stats, like 3 times more likely to be victims of a serious assault.
Mm-hmm.
And then more than half, I think, of like police killings in the US are towards people with a mental illness or disability. And that's a lot of the folks that I know that have gotten wrapped up in the criminal justice system. It's altercations with police. They were, being unusual in public or something, and the police were called and the police don't understand the mental illness and they escalate and this happens all the time. There's just not a good understanding. But I think to go to what you were asking about, with something like psychosis, which many people with schizophrenia may experience, but also, people can have psychotic episodes when you have bipolar disorder. Certain medications can induce psychosis. Older adults, when they are in the beginning stages of like Alzheimer's and dementia, can be pushed very easily into psychosis just with a little bit of a change in their body chemistry. They get a urinary tract infection and they start experience psychosis. And psychosis is really a disconnect from like a shared reality. So there's different like chemical processes that go on in the brain, and it can be different depending on that diagnosis, but people will develop delusions. So ideas that are not like logical or what we would deem logical. They might, they might have hallucinations. So they might see things that other people don't see.
Yeah, voices in their head. Yeah.
Yep, they might hear voices in their head that seem very, very real. And I've worked with people who are extremely distressed by the voices they hear in their head and can barely maintain a conversation because they're so distressing. And then I've worked with people who really enjoy the voices that they hear, or might perceive people around them that they see as like their family or like their friends, and they find them very comforting. There's different levels of insight. Some people can kind of be a little bit aware that they are not experiencing like the same reality as other people. And then some people have absolutely no insight at all, and there's no arguing. So there's different shades and levels to it. I think when it becomes an actual dangerous situation is when it is really fed by fear. So when the person is in an extremely fearful state, when the delusions or the hallucinations are terrifying and scary, sometimes they present as like demonic, or they present as they're being persecuted. That's when you worry a little bit about violence, because the person feels like they have to defend themselves. So it's usually pretty
right. And if they
clear.
think you're a demon, then all bets are off in that moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And any person, if you can kind of like, for an empathy experiment, imagine if you truly, truly believed that a demon was coming for you and saw it. I mean, it's a very multi-sensory experience. So your entire body's sensations will perceive this as reality. And the parts of your brain that are going to check that and say, maybe this isn't happening, they are just offline.
Yeah, I think it's easy to underestimate the power of the amygdala.
Yeah.
Once it perceives that a threat has gone beyond a certain point, its job is to tell the body to produce cortisol to shut off thought, so that one acts and doesn't think.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Obviously, it's fascinating, but I think a lot of people have known friends or family members or people close to us who've gone through psychosis, and this feeling of helplessness, that this person is unreachable, and yet you reach them. So there they are, whatever has happened, and they find themselves in the situation now, living where they live. And Leana Tank walks into their life. What's your objective? A lot of people, again, it's very natural. It might not be right, but it's very natural to think, well, they've done these terrible things. They should just be locked up and the key should be thrown away. That's just it. Die in a dungeon somewhere. But of course, actually, life goes on, and somebody has to be there to make that a life that has meaning. Again, you can hear the devil's advocate saying, no, they've lost the right. They've forfeited that right. They should suffer, and they should live in a situation of unpleasantness and suffering as punishment for what they've done, even if they were not themselves or didn't know what they were doing or whatever. You then arrive. Actually, let's back up a bit. You didn't come out of your mother's womb doing this job. So how did you end up doing this job? And then let's get to what happens when you arrive in their world. So where does it begin for you? How did you get into this?
Oh gosh. Okay.
Take us way back, because there must be stuff in your childhood that prepared you for this kind of work. There had to be.
Yeah. I'm like trying to think how far back to go.
Because essentially, often when I'm asking people about childhood in this type of work, it's often about, some sort of trauma or that. But we often overlook actually the things that set one up really advantageously in one's childhood. And so you do such extraordinary work. It must have its roots in some deep sort of sense of security or something.
Yeah, I think that at my core, I'm very, very curious and very interested in kind of that full breadth of the human experience. And I was very drawn to occupational therapy. I studied in college. I studied psychology and literature and philosophy, and I've been like a big reader all my life. And I was drawn to OT because it is very, very broad. Occupational therapy is at its core just about using what people love to do as a way to promote like healing and meaning, to help people do more of the things that they love and are important to them, and then to also use meaningful, what we call occupations are really like anything that somebody might find meaningful, whether it's, playing chess or taking a walk outside or riding a horse or whatever. It can be anything. Using those things to promote healing. So it's really broad, and you can apply it across just about any kind of population, from kids to older adults to people recovering from a hip replacement to people with schizophrenia, in a locked institution. And I really like that because I don't like being kind of pigeonholed and siloed to one dogma or one set of beliefs or one kind of approach. Now, I grew up in a pretty like fundamentalist home.
Fundamentalist
And
Christian.
yeah. And that never,
How
it
did that
never,
prepare you for seeing the breadth of the human experience? Because that's presumably about narrowing the human experience, is it not?
yeah. And Yeah. And I feel like growing up in that kind of it was a very, very like loving home and just like a great family, good community. But it was when you grow up in a very fundamentalist Christian home, it's really about molding you to be the person that belief system wants you to be, and not really supporting you in expressing who you really are, or really like, mm, it's more about you figuring out what's the right thing to feel, what's the right way to behave, what's the right emotion to have, and not like tapping in and understanding what you actually do feel and what you actually do believe. So I feel like that whole process and being able to figure out how to do that came like really late for me. So I
How did it
almost was really, gosh, like college and even beyond. And I think as I have like worked through figuring out, how to actually engage with that, it really motivated me to like help other people do that. And also to work in a way that is like, how can I help these people who are not acknowledged, are not seen, are not valued for who they are? How can I help them figure out who they are and be accepted for who they are? And when you are coming in to work with somebody in these settings, you have to walk in very non-judgmentally. You have to the extremes, dismantle your judgment about what they deserve and what they've done. You have to be pretty radical in accepting kind of who this person is and who they've been in the world. And be ready to meet that person exactly where they're at. So it's always really interesting. I will do a little chart review and read like, what has this person done? What's their history? And it always reads pretty rough. It's always a little scary and a little shocking. It's like, I mean, how would you like it if before I met you, I read the rap sheet of every terrible thing you've ever done in your life, right? Like all probably the worst moments are all in these people's charts for everyone to read before they meet them. And then almost always the person I meet is like completely different. Like you would never imagine that that was their history. It's very, very rare that I meet anyone that actually like wants to hurt people or, has any intention of doing that. It's all these things that have happened when they were really pushed into their survival state. But I do meet people that like don't really want to work with me, or maybe they're pretty disconnected from reality and they're hard to reach, or they've been therapized and in institutions for so long that they're just kind of like, get lost. I don't want to, I don't want anything to do with you. But I feel like I have developed through different ways, like a way of kind of approaching people without an expectation, without an agenda, and being just very, very open to meet them exactly where they are. And where they are is completely fine. And often when I'm asked to go meet with someone, it's because the team has an idea of what they should be working on. Maybe they haven't showered in a year and they want me to help them do that. Maybe they struggle with managing their emotions and they want me to work with them on that or whatever. But I kind of have to put all that to the side and just meet this person and be like, well, what do they think is important? What's like
established relationship, effectively.
Yes, yes. And there's people, and I have the luxury of doing this, where I can sit down And what they want to do is like talk about the rings and the jewelry that I have on and rocks and stones. Or what they want to do is, just listen to music, on my phone. And I can do that with them for weeks and weeks and weeks to kind of establish that relationship and then figure out like what's important to them and where do they want to grow, where do they want to develop. And a lot of times those other things just kind of fall into place when they feel like they have like a safe relationship, when they feel like they have more meaning in their lives, when they feel like they, are actually
Heard?
heard. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You, as growing up as a young fundamentalist Christian, were not probably schooled in this type of non-judgmentalism, right? Because any dogmatic religion has pretty clear judgments. You're either in or you're out. You either follow the rules or you don't. You're either saved or you're going to hell. And it's also a punishment and reward based culture, right? If you do these quote unquote bad things, you're going to hell and you'll probably be ostracized and perhaps even physically punished, here. And that includes if you just don't toe the line, won't support you. How did you get from that to what I think is, and I guess what comes to mind here is what you're actually talking about is what Christianity is supposed to be, which is love thy neighbor, don't be an asshole. If you are an asshole, it's entirely forgivable. Forgiveness, redemption. Do you think that some really discerning part of you as a child thought, yeah, all that punishment stuff, that's all shite. But all that love thy neighbor, redemption stuff, that's good shit. And what made you able to discern that? Because I don't think everybody who grows up in that can. Go back to your young self.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of it was just baked in me. I can remember being very, very young. I was a very like magically minded, animal loving, kindergartner, first grader. And even in elementary school, hearing that was the big like environmentalism was like a big burgeoning thing. And I remember hearing about it and being like, that sounds cool. And then in church or wherever in the dogma, it was like, oh no, we don't believe in environmentalism and we don't, it's all about supporting people and humanity. And we don't, we want
Man has dominion.
man
Yeah,
has dominion. Yeah. And that never really made sense to me. I remember just being kind of like, oh, I don't know about that. And I think I read a lot. I when I went to college, I studied philosophy. I had a really deep interest in like other cultures and traveling. My grandparents were missionaries in Africa and South America. So I grew up with all these stories about my dad growing up in these other places that I thought were really fascinating and intriguing. And my mom's side of the family, my grandfather was like a magician. And so I grew up with all these like, my mom and my uncle had all these like sleight of hand magician tricks and stories about his life as a magician. I mean, he was a lawyer, but he was like a big time magician. He was like the president of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. So I think I grew up with all these different ideas. And when I went to college and studied theology, I not theology, but philosophy, when I actually started reading and thinking about the concept of hell and trying to make it make sense, how all of these like other cultures of the world, like 90% of like the world's population would be just kind of resigned to hell. And somehow the Americans, with all of our like, our money and our comfort, also happen to be correct in our beliefs and we'll go to heaven. To me, I was like, yeah, that makes absolutely no sense at all.
America.
Yeah. Yeah. But I did like and believe in that idea of caring for like the least of these. And when I was just starting to look at like where to invest my like my work and my energy and my time, I was like, well, that seems like a worthy place, to invest my like work life. I really loved, I read Oliver Sacks I read his work in college, and it was really like connected with me. And I'm actually reading his
The man
letters
who
right
mistook his
now.
mother for a hat.
Yeah, he was a neurologist, but he was a very like human kind of poet neurologist that like he wrote these case histories of these really extreme cases of people's experiences with like different neurological conditions, but it was all about how they kind of lost all foundation of like who they are, who they were in the world, how they experienced life, and then how they kind of remade it and adapted and kind of found their humanity and worked those conditions their into another form of meaning. And I just found it to be really, really beautiful and interesting. And wasn't even aware of, it's just like beyond this imaginable experience, how people can wind up living and still having a very full, meaningful, rich life. And that just really fascinated me. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of like wandering away from the question. I don't even remember where we
No, I think I
started.
think I think you got that, and it leads me to a triple question, which is this one. So, how does one develop the ability to approach without agenda? And then my devil's advocate question is there actually no agenda? Because, okay, maybe they haven't showered or they're not communicating. So presumably you're brought in there for some sort of healing. Is healing an agenda? And is that an okay agenda? You know what I mean? So just your thoughts on this, really.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
If you're in the equine-assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine-assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine-assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine-assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children, helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients. Taquine equine integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this.
A couple of things to say on that. I'll start with, in my experience, the most powerful, real healing has always come from that person themselves. So I really don't, and I've gotten more and more and more to where I feel like my role is really just to help remove whatever barriers are there for that person to, find what healing is for them. And it can just be these really small shifts in like greater participation, greater connection to themselves, greater connection to others. It's for a lot of the people that I work with, like they're not going to what even is healing, like what is healing isn't like they're fixed or they're cured or they're healed. It's
Well, there's
like,
difference between healing it's a good question. I think in my mind, there is a big difference in healing and cure. Like,
yeah,
people often think, knowing when I went off to Mongolia with Rowan, for example, oh, you were looking for a cure for autism. No, I wasn't. But I was
Yeah.
looking for healing because we were all
Mhm.
suffering. And
Yeah.
we did find it. But the autism wasn't what was causing the suffering. It was reactions to other things. But yeah, so I think that is just worth drawing attention to, that healing and cure are two slightly different things. And so go on.
Yeah. And I think that is definitely the way I am operating and the way I am looking at things. Like a lot of the people I work with are always going to need some degree of like support just to be safe and to live in the world. But often they are really, really disconnected from themselves. They're disconnected from other people. They don't have a lot of meaning or purpose in their lives. Their days are kind of full of like nothing, a void. So if I'm able to even shift that a little bit and bring in some purpose, bring in some movement, bring in some energy, some vitality, some, just, yeah, any kind of like change in that I see as progress, as healing. And I've seen small shifts and I've seen really big shifts, and I've worked with people that I've been like, I didn't do anything for them. And then a year later, I will hear a story that, actually there was an impact or there was a big change. So, but generally, if I come in with some kind of preconceived notion or idea of like what that's going to look like and what's going to help them, it doesn't go very well. And so coming in with no agenda and just really, really radically listening to that person and where they are and what's important to them and what they feel could be, what that would mean for them is always the way to go. And then my job is just to be like, yes, great idea. How are we going to do that? And honestly, the systems that we're working in are so dysfunctional and so broken. It's really basic stuff for a lot of people, in the program where are probably most intense. It's like locked, all men, mostly in that like not guilty by reason of insanity. So they have, all part of the criminal justice system. It sounds really gnarly. Most of the time, what they want to do is take a walk outside. I take people, if it's safe for me to do so, and most of the time it is, I'll just take them walking. They're about 15 minutes from Lake Michigan, which is beautiful. And I'll just take them out to the lake and we'll walk on the beach. And I'm like one of the only ones that does that kind of thing, like it's just not really part of the medical healthcare system frame of reference to see that as like a healing activity. But for me, it's like a no-brainer, like, let's go see some beautiful nature. And I just did that recently and had this young man who was really struggling. And it's been like a cold winter. And we went out to the lakeshore and there's just this little patch of blue sky, and he like pointed at it and he was like, that's telling me that God's telling me he's got my back, you know? And that led to a really, beautiful conversation about like, yeah, like that's beautiful. That's such a like, what a lovely way of like nature showing you that like it's there for you, it's showing up for you. And like what else tells you that? He's like, well, sometimes I see birds, and that tells me everything's going to be okay, and just conversations like that help give people a sense of connection, a sense of like insight, and get them thinking along those lines, I think is like really healing, and letting, bringing people into nature, and then letting nature show up and do what it's going to do, and then be just prepared to frame that and organize it and kind of like give them a way to synthesize it is one of the most powerful and easiest ways, I think. And then the other thing in that program that everyone wants to do is cook.
That's interesting. Why?
Yeah. A lot of them have been in prison or institutions a lot of their lives, and they never ever got to cook. They don't know how. Even in that facility,
Do they tell you, or is this something that you suggest?
a lot of times it's like the only thing they want to do with me. So it'll be like, what do you want to do? Nothing. And then maybe I'll give options, and they'll be like, actually, yes, I would love to make brownies. People love food. Cooking is a really, really just foundational, functional skill. Like if they're gonna like move on from there, and everyone wants to be more independent, for you know, the day-to-day life of most of us, of like driving a car, having a home, having a job, is like beyond the wildest dreams of like most of the people that I'm working with. So if they feel like they can like work towards skills that will give them some level of independence, they're a little more motivated for that too. And so I'll do whatever I can to like, I've like rigged up little hot plates so we can like make burgers or pancakes, or I'll take them to there's other programs that have kitchens where we have kitchen access and we'll cook things. And if you think about like promoting a sense of safety and like community and connection, like cooking is just great for that. If you think about like,
It's well-being, I guess, isn't it?
yeah. And like if you are like cooking in the kitchen with a friend or something, or making dinner with a friend, or it's just a very like safe, connected, enjoyable, ancient ancient thing to be engaged in. And that's so many of them want to do that with me. So I try to do that as much as I can.
This was actually, you've sort of partly answered, but I still want to pose the question because I think it bears more discussion. I would imagine that quite a few of the people are in a fairly profound state of despair. And when you're in despair, you lose motivation. So if you were to say, well, I do what they like, they love music, or they want, but I should imagine that a lot of people have lost a sense of what they like and what they love. But what you've just described is effectively nature, because I would put cooking in that category too, because you're using natural elements, natural processes for a natural process. When you're encountering that nihilistic despair that people have given up, is nature always the key?
That is usually the easiest, most effective, most powerful thing to access. Yeah, I would say.
So why is that not prescribed?
That's a very good question.
What do you think? Seriously, why? Given that I think deep down we all know this, right? And that mental health started with the Quakers and asylums were supposed to be, asylum means sanctuary, right? That's its actual meaning, that they created effectively gardens that people could rest in and come back to themselves in, and so on and so on. And we've known this forever. And you are now getting some physicians prescribing nature. It's just begun to happen, I think, post-COVID. Why do you think that, given that, intelligent people are helping to create the policies that affect people in mental health institutions, why isn't it just a fundamental? What's blocking it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just the state of our medical systems is the perspective is very mechanized. It's very reductionistic. So the focus is much more on medications, behavior management, behavior plans, and, things like that, more focused on diagnosing, prescribing, and there's just not as much thought put into the environment, the indoor environment, the outdoor environment. Things are pretty siloed. There's, lawn care people that take care of the outside, and then there's maintenance for the inside. And yeah, it's just that whole picture isn't considered. Even just the consideration of like the impact and power of like the culture and the community of a program can have such a powerful, powerful influence on that person's progress and their healing, because I mean, our neurobiology is not to be like in this vacuum. Like our brains and nervous systems are designed to be always engaging with and connecting with and resonating with the other people around us and the nature around us and the environment around us. And that is like the number one most powerful determinant of kind of like where someone is going to be, what they're going to be doing with their time, what kind of state they're going to be in. But that's just, it's a very complex, dynamic system that is not linear. And I think that the medical system wants everything to be very linear and very like A plus B equals C. And let's just change this one thing, or let's just look at it this one way. Or they look at that person in a vacuum and they don't look at the whole web of every determinant that is contributing to that person's health.
I guess there's also presumably a desire, both negative and positive, for control. To say these people are out of control, not safe. They're not safe to be out in the community. So therefore, a walk in nature is out in the community. We can't risk people. We can't risk these people, the service user, if you like, losing control, having a psychotic, And while one can understand that, you seem to some degree to be putting the lie to that, which is interesting to me. Are you ever afraid, let's say you take them out to Lake Michigan, that they're going to do something crazy, that you yourself are in danger, or that other people on that beach could be in danger? I mean, admittedly, I've been out to the Lake Michigan beaches. Unless you're going to a hot spot, it's a lot of, it's wild. So it's not like there's a ton of people around. But nonetheless, is it irresponsible to take them out like that? It's, just talk through all these complexities that I could see going through the heads of policymakers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always mindful of who I'm working with, and I know them well. And there are safety measures in place. There's assessments, there's safety plans, and there's all of this structure in place to kind of determine levels of safety for people going in the community. If they
I presume
need,
sometimes minders,
yeah, extra people. Some will say you need 2 staff. Some can't go with a female. Some have to go with a male. Like there's a lot of structure of safety in place around working with these people. And I'm very, very mindful. There are certain people that I will totally go for a hike in the woods alone with and feel completely safe. And there's people I would never do that with. And, you know, for most of the folks, when you know them, you know, it's, you know, when they're in their own, they're connected to themselves, they have a good sense of themselves, they're in control, whatever, you know, whatever that means. They're aware of their actions and they're in a good headspace. And you know when someone is struggling, when someone's activated, when there's a higher risk of, you know, them getting triggered into some kind of distress. And that wouldn't be a time when I'm, you know, taking somebody out, or maybe I would have someone else come with me if I'm trying to take them out to like help them manage their stress. But for the most part, when I'm working with people, they're in a good headspace. They're pretty centered. They're, you know, not in crisis. There's a really, really big difference between when someone is in active crisis, and that is when you see a lot of those like really distressing, challenging behaviors. And it does happen, but there's a completely difference, you know, when someone is in crisis and when they're not.
Are you not worried that a crisis could be triggered by something outside of your control?
It can happen, but you kind of know your person and you know what kind of things are going to trigger that. And you can take precautions. And I'm pretty proactive. Like, I know how to assess the situation, and I know my person, and I know what might be distressing to them, and I avoid that. Or maybe sometimes we're like, I have people that going out in the community does trigger some anxiety, triggers some hallucinations. They might hear people saying mean things to them that are not like really real. And that might be something that we talk about. Maybe we practice like some grounding tools. You know, I have a lot of tools in my little trauma toolkit, sensory toolkit for helping people manage that kind of distress. So that would be something that we're like building awareness of and we're working on. And I can very intentionally kind of push their window of tolerance without them going over the edge. So, yeah.
Take us through your toolkit. That's fascinating. I think a lot of us would like to have access to those sorts of tools.
Oh, you know, a lot of it is I use a lot of body-based sensory strategies. So as an OT, I did a lot of training on like sensory integration and understanding how our senses kind of shape our reality.
Our nervous systems, in fact.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so fascinating that it's one of my areas I'm so fascinated by, and it really is a growing area in mental health. I think people are understanding more and more that like mind and body connection, and that it's not just that mental health is this like disembodied thing that just happens in our brains, but it's really
right.
Our whole bodies, you know.
Okay, we understand. Okay, let's take into account the nervous system, and nature presumably has fewer bad sensory triggers because we're organisms, you know, therefore. But for avoiding crisis or for dealing with crisis, can you be specific about some tools that you think might be, because we all go through crisis, right? And we all have crises in our families and we have crises in ourselves. This can happen several times a day, just in the most normal situations. So, because you work on the cutting edge of this, you know, there are some tools.
Yeah. Well, first is I am very, very aware of myself and where my system is at. I, have developed a lot of tools just to keep myself like grounded, keep myself in kind of that calm, regulated nervous system state, being able to use my voice, my body language, my breathing to take advantage of that like mirroring reflection resonance with the other person's system. You use these tools to kind of become that like safe anchor for that person. And a lot of it is in like the language that you use and just the way that you show up. And then I'm always going to try to organize. So using things like rhythm. So music, offering to play music, offering to seeing like what kind of music do you want to listen to? Let's put it on. Let's rock to the music. Let's walk to the music. Let's try to sing along. I have done a lot of training too in like the different nervous system states. So being able to observe if somebody is edging into more of a fight response or a flight response or a freeze. You have to really train your eye to see those very subtle shifts in that person's physiology that tell you that they are starting to become activated. And it can be as small as like they're holding their breath. And being able to, in a very curious, non-judgmental way, notice those things. A lot of times, if somebody feels like you are that aware and noticing that kind of a shift in their state, that alone will bring about a lot of safety for them. And so being able to see that and kind of head it off before things escalate really higher, because once somebody has really shifted into an activated fight or flight state, it's a lot harder to bring them down. But
Okay, quick question about the music. So what if they want to listen to music that is going to dysregulate them even further?
I'd give some
No, let's listen to some lovely
choices and
Mozart. And they're like, no, I want to
options.
listen to, whatever. And
Yeah.
you don't want to then get into a no, you can't. And at the
Right.
same time, you're trying to follow them, but you also know it's going to trigger them. So yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
how do you
Mm-hmm.
deal with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's tricky. I mean, I would maybe give some choices within that like area that they're looking at. And I have like a Spotify account that I can like pick just about anything. And even if, there's music that is going to trigger them, and it's hard to say like how much it would. Even if something is really, really like ragey, we might be able to put that on and I might still be able within that. I'm going to try to organize a rhythm. I'm going to try to organize like maybe we get out a drum or we get something out and we try to like go along to the beat with that, to try to like build a rhythm, build an organization within like the music that they want to listen to. Or maybe we're going to go and like power walk to it. Or maybe we're going to try to sing along as a way to kind of like get that energy out in a positive way.
I'll walk you to it. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, like I mean, I use music all the time.
And I'm just
And
thinking, even let's say that's what these tools are so useful in more mundane situations. I remember when I was a kid and wanting to listen to lots and lots and lots of metal. And, there was always in the house that kind of, no, go away from your horrible metal. I hate your metal. So, of course, metal became a point of rebellion. But at no point, for example, did anyone say, actually, why don't we just clean the house really, really hard to this metal? To this day, it's my house cleaning music. Like if you put on metal,
mm-hmm,
you're going to get a clean house. If I'm in,
mm-hmm,
I'm just going to start cleaning. You know, so it's interesting that you say that the idea of sort of taking even a ragey energy and
channeling it.
channeling it. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But you have to have some sort of inner security to be able to do that. What do you do then if they have gone over the edge? What do you do
Yeah.
then if they have gone over the edge?
then it's really just about safety, and that's when you have to be aware of like who else is around, who can have your back, how working together just to like keep the situation safe. And the folks that I work with, like when they do go over the edge and when they are, their systems can be so sensitive that that's when things can get pretty extreme and unsafe. So honestly, in my nearly 10 years of working there, I really haven't experienced much of that myself. Honestly, I have certainly worked with people who then I hear about, like, oh, made cookies with this person this morning. And then last night they destroyed the whole entire program and destroyed, went and, threw rocks at the staff's car. And I'm like, oh, dang, they had a bad night.
Those
Mm.
cookies. Yeah.
Right. The cookies did not create the happiness I was hoping for. But I think because, and some of it is just the nature of my position, I'm kind of the good guy. I'm kind of the safe, friendly, fun person that is doing the things that the person wants to do. And I am pretty skilled at where that person's zone of tolerance is and not to push them over that edge.
Yeah.
And honestly, the things that really push people into that fight or flight are those more authoritarian, controlling, dominance-based ways of engagement. And we struggle with that, with our staff and those kinds of interactions because that can be like the go-to for a lot of people. That's how a lot of people were raised. That's how a lot of people feel like they need to keep things safe and keep things locked down and in control. And those are the kinds of ways of interacting that really escalate people. And so I have found that if you're not meeting people with that kind of energy, like most of the time, that I just don't, I just don't see that side of them.
And it's interesting because, yeah, I obviously in my line of work, your line of work, one's meeting a lot of people who are dealing with people struggling with mental health, and getting attacked, punched, kicked, bitten can be part of the game. And one of the things I find really interesting about talking to you is that I'm not hearing those stories from you, even though you're in there with people who certainly could and perhaps do with others. I don't want to jinx you, but why do you think, beyond the fact that you don't adopt an authoritarian, escalating approach, as you say, if they do flip over the edge, it has to be about safety, and therefore a certain amount of coercion is going to come in. You could end up on the end of a flying fist. Why don't you, do you think?
I mean, I think that's a big part of it is not coming in with that mindset of trying to control people, trying to dominate, trying to
There's so much of it about intention.
yeah, I think the energy that you bring to it is a huge part of it. And then I'm also just really, really attuned to where they're at and listening to them and kind of using myself as a way to help them connect more to themselves. And I think when you show up to work with people in that way, like you're really a lot less likely to run into those kinds of challenges. I'm not saying it can't happen. And honestly, if somebody's in active crisis, I'm not going to go and try to work with them because that's not really that's not the time where I'm going to really be effective, right? That's not the
If
time
you
when
were to
people
show
are
up at the
learning and
facility and
growing.
the people are like, sorry, Leana, they're just, busy
Yeah.
kicking the doors in.
Yeah.
Would you say, okay, I'll see you tomorrow in that case?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When, okay, I'm torn between going further into nature or into art and aesthetics here, because, which actually is perhaps the same thing. Let's just talk a bit about indoor environments. So taking people out into nature, fantastic. Okay. The indoor environment. What do you feel is the importance of art and aesthetics in mental health? including our everyday mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's enormously important. And
Why?
that's an
Why is it important?
area, yeah. I mean, that's an area that I've been really trying to like think outside the box in our programs because they do tend to look pretty institutional just because things get ripped up and destroyed. And so everything has to be really, really durable. But I know, like I read this book called Healing Spaces that just goes into so much detail and research about the importance of the environment on people's mental health and their healing. And there was even, I recall, a study like done in hospitals that if somebody is in a room with a window where they can see outside and they can see like trees, that they heal faster from medical conditions than a room with a window facing like a brick wall. And there's so many different aspects of like the indoor and the outdoor environment, just lighting and color and the furniture, and like the sounds and the smells and even just like the space, how the space is laid out itself. And I do a lot of evaluating that when I help a lot on the teams that are deciding like, okay, this person should go here, this person should go here. And we have homes that are specifically for like autistic adults who have really, really intense, challenging behaviors and trying to make sure that they have environments that are optimal for them. And it can be a challenge to advocate even for like, let's make sure they have some rocking chairs, right? Like, and when you're talking adults, it's even with autism, it's even more challenging because like you can have a little swing for a little kid or whatever, and that's easy. But I've got like 300-pound dudes that also could use a swing, but it's a lot harder to find a swing that's going to hold up. And even our rocking chairs, like we will buy recliners that rock and they get destroyed within a few months. So really like trying to figure out what is going to do the job, what's going to hold up, what's not going to get destroyed, what's going to be cost effective. It can be really challenging. And the same, putting art and things on the walls, it's finding things that are aesthetically pleasing, that are not going to get ripped down and destroyed. There was also like research on even putting up like nature, like fractals, like nature art that has like those like repeating patterns and things in it reduces like anxiety and depression. I found a research study about that. I thought it was so
To
interesting.
me, that would make sense because, of course, it mimics the environment that our organism is designed for. It's interesting. As you were talking, it made me remember a guy I had a very fascinating conversation with once, who his job was he's in England, to take pubs that had he worked for the brewery, and his specialty was to take pubs that had a real problem with violent culture. Those British listeners know what violent pub culture can truly be in the UK. They can be murderous places, the wrong pubs, and turning them around. And he was this really small. I expect a bloke like that to be, huge, shaven head, tattoos everywhere, intimidating. He was this little hippie. And I said, "How are you so successful at this, that they pay you the big bucks?" He said, "Rue, it's so easy. When people want to fight, they want a fighting space. So the first thing we do is we take that space away. So almost all violent pubs will have a big open area with all the seating around the walls effectively, so that there's a place for people to do this. They might call it a dance floor, but it's not. It's a gladiatorial arena. The first thing we do, Rue, is we put nice, big, comfy sofas and armchairs in there that are sort of deep and comfy. He said people sit in them and they chill out, and they sort of don't much feel like getting up and throwing punches.
That's so interesting.
And he said, and then we put all sorts of nice art on the walls. And he said, and then we play classical music. We pipe classical music. And there was another place I knew of this happening in a bad shopping mall in another area of England that can be quite violent, where local youth were coming and, you know, smashing up and looting and things. And there was one of the shopkeepers who'd read something similar, and he started piping classical music from speakers that no one could get to. And apparently he said it was amazing, Rupert, that the people just evaporated. They just wouldn't hang out there because they could be hungry and to take their anger somewhere else. And it's so interesting how in these really practical situations, what we know chills us out: a comfy armchair, nice art on the walls, nice lighting, classical music, say. Why on earth, again, wouldn't that be an institutional staple?
Yeah.
You know, again, maybe it comes down to this idea that, well, they've done wrong, they should suffer. But of course, that's not just in punitive, you know, criminal justice places. That's in schools, and that's in places where people are actually supposed to be nurtured.
Yeah, and I don't think it's that matter that like, oh, they don't deserve it or they shouldn't have something comfortable. I think it's just there's not a lot of thought and intention given to it, you know, or the furniture that is initially bought that will actually hold up is not comfortable at all. And that just is kind of what sticks around, and it's just a cost thing. You know, there's not much money for these folks at all. There's not a lot of resources for them to have a very aesthetically pleasing environment. And it is hard. I mean, when they are struggling, then the behaviors can be very destructive. So there's holes in the walls. The furniture gets destroyed. You know, I've had a guy struggle with autism when he would throw all the furniture outside of the house when he was struggling, you know, so it's hard to have nice things when that's the situation. But
unless I suppose you make the sofa and furniture so heavy that it's just so difficult to pick up that you
and that's what we have
time.
now. Yeah. And that's what we have in a lot of the places now. But it's that kind of furniture isn't super comfy, you know, it's not, and it's not very aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe we need to start enlisting designers for this. Okay, so now I would like to talk a little bit about how you maintain your own resilience. And one of the things that I think everyone is struck by when they know you and know what you do is how you seem to retain this lightness of heart, that there isn't you know, I know quite a few people who work in difficult situations with difficult populations. There can be a certain bitterness that can creep in. I've never seen that in you. I also happen to know, of course, that you're an accomplished and avid horsewoman. And we have a mutual friend, Warwick Schiller. That's how we know each other. And those listeners who know Warwick know that he's a horse trainer, but also a podcaster. And his thing is attunement. And that if you can attune to your horse, your relationship with your horse will change so radically that things that seemed really, really difficult or impossible suddenly just become kind of everyday. And I think he's been borne out in this, and that's why he's as popular as he is. And I know that you followed his attunement stuff with horses. And you told me once in a conversation that this had actually helped you, this attunement thing had actually helped you work. Can you talk to us about how you understand what's your relationship with horses? How does that impact your resilience? And then talk to us about this attunement thing and how one can transfer sort of species to species. Just wrap on that. I'd like to know your thoughts.
Yeah. Working with Warwick's like attunement practices absolutely radically changed the way I was able to work with the people I worked with. And I saw so many parallels. So I'll talk about that in a minute here. I do. I have I had two horses, my older mare, Sunny, who is just my heart. And I think that having that practice and working with horses really, really is a way for me to like take care of myself. And I think that to do this kind of work with other people, you have to very radically take care of yourself and be really mindful of your own mental and emotional health. And our culture like really loves a martyr and really perpetuates that kind of mindset that you're supposed to just kind of like sacrifice yourself to your job, any job, not even necessarily a job in the human services field. Like it's just a culture of kind of burnout. And so I think for me, having a horse really helps me keep my own mental health level. But I got involved in Warwick's work when I got a young horse. I had this 6-month-old Norwegian fjord pony kind of fall into my lap. And I had never trained a horse before, like started a horse as a baby. And she was really challenging. My older mare is very easy, very just like a joy to work with. And this young horse was tough. Like she was just like on you all the time, kind of like nipping and biting, and you would try to like create space, or like I would read different things, like use a whip to back them up and things, and she would just like bite the whip and try to run me over. And like she did not care like what I did. And that I somehow kind of like stumbled upon Warwick's approaches, and his really connected, I think, with me and like what I felt was possible for me, because I don't have a lot of that like really like aggressive, intense energy, I think. And I think that young horse saw that in me and was just like, I'm just going to run all over her. And I think I didn't have a really good sense of even.
You say that though, Leana, but I know you well enough to know I've seen you in situations where it's true you don't get aggressive, but you do very clearly express your boundaries.
If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com. Check out the free introduction course. Take it from there.
And that I learned from my young horse.
Okay. So it was not always so.
No, not at all. No, that was a massive thing I learned from that horse that she taught me.
But yet you must
how
have
to
been
do that.
good at setting your boundaries in the work that you do.
I think yes, but it's gotten much, much more intentional and much better. And this was like 4 years ago that I started working with this young horse and started kind of down that path. So, it's been something I've been developing for a little while now. But yeah, I think, it's interesting how that kind of horse will just kind of like find your weaknesses and like really show them to you. And Warwick's work is very, very like trauma informed. His work on, kind of built on this understanding of the nervous system and polyvagal theory and all of these things. And these were all things that I was a little bit aware of in the periphery, like through the mental health work that I was doing. And then, kind of in the horse world, but I hadn't really, he was the first one that kind of like put it all together into one place that really made sense to me. And I also just really, really connected. He would talk about being a little bit emotionally shut down and kind of in his head and not really in touch with his own emotional life and experiences. And I think that I was a little bit in that place too. Like, I think through my upbringing and through that kind of like lack of emotional awareness or like validation, I just had never really learned how to like actually feel those feelings and connect with them and let them process in a way that wasn't just like intellectually in my head. And so I think for me, I started practicing his attunement practices with my young horse
Can you
as a
give us
way
some
to work with
examples?
her.
Give us some
Yeah,
examples of two or
I
three.
will. Because what he does, and I think what it really is like a way to physically embody the practice of becoming an attuned person, which is something that I don't think you can just read about and learn about and understand it and do it. You have to experience it and embody it and practice it. So he has a flow chart that he has videos on, and it's an actual flow chart that you do with your horse before you ask it to do anything. So you show up without judgment, without an expectation. Depending on what the horse does, your whole intention is to respond in a way that shows the horse that you see them, that you get them, that you kind of like are aware of what's going on with them. That's the intention of the flow chart. And it's where you start before you ask the horse to do anything. And the intention is to get the horse kind of in a calm, open, receptive state. So you start, and like if the horse is just kind of walking, you just match steps with the horse. And you literally just wherever they go in the arena, you just kind of match their steps and follow along with them. And if they stop, you stop. And if they kind of look into the distance, you just kind of like, what are you looking at? You look at them. And if they seem like they're kind of just tuning you out, there's a scratching for connection tool that I also will use a lot on its own, where you just kind of give them a scratch and you wait and really watch and see, like for a little acknowledgement, like a little ear flick or a blink, or for them to kind of turn and look at you, and then you stop scratching to show like, I saw that. And it's so interesting because you'll see if you do this with a horse, they'll kind of like give you a double take when you do that a couple times. They'll kind of turn around and look at you like, oh, are you listening to me? like I've had this experience with so many horses now because I just kind of do it naturally. And I'll have the same experience with autistic people. Like if I am working with someone who is non-speaking or kind of in their own little world, and I do something that kind of mirrors them, or this like am using my, even like sometimes I'll give them little scratches or something, and I'll know I've made a connection when I get the same look from them, like, oh, are you actually paying attention to me? Like, are you actually on my wavelength? It's really interesting. But anyway, so yeah, there's just this whole very, very, very kind of like organized thing that you do. And I did it a lot with my young horse, and I kind of practiced it too with like other horses I was taking care of. And it just kind of like puts you in this meditative, flow centered space. And I would start to kind of find myself going into that space, like working with the people that I worked with too, being able to show up very non-judgmentally without expectation, and also really watching them for their little signals of like when they were getting upset or activated or anything, to be able to kind of reflect that back to them. Like, oh, hey, I see you. That's the intention. And that really helps people connect to themselves too. So
Is what we're talking about here really listening, but listening on a cellular level, not just on a kind of auditory processing level?
it's kind of listening with your whole body, but it is like you kind of become that. You kind of become safety, because for people like that sense that somebody is really like seeing them and hearing them is like safety for them.
And I guess with horses, it's a fight, flight, prey animal. So if you can become safety, then you're going to be able to bridge the predator-prey divide. And I suppose when people are living very much from the amygdala, then they are effectively behaving like a prey animal, which also might have to fight for its life if that's what it perceives it has to do.
Yeah. I mean, I take a lot of the big trauma courses with the big trauma people, like the Peter Levine of somatic experiencing and all of these, different names. And like everyone's talking about attunement as like the number one basis for that like relational healing of trauma, because that we as a species feel safety with other people, and
Is attunement something you think we should actually all do in no matter what walk of life to
yeah.
get along better and have less drama?
Yeah. I mean, I think it can go beyond just, attuning with other people. I think that you can attune with other species of animals. You can walk out in nature and experience everything as kind of a communication. You're really looking to listen. You're looking for like, okay, what is this saying to me? What am I taking from this? So I think that it really is like kind of a state of being you can get into. Yeah.
It makes me think of a recent conversation I had with Craig Foster, who made that amazing film My Octopus Teacher. But where if one wants to see attuning and crossing a species divide, that's it, I think. But one of the things that he points out, which I think is in line with what you're saying, is that one's relationship with one's environment, i.e. the planet, i.e. other people, i.e. the weather, i.e. vegetation, i.e. noticing the slug trails on paving stones in London and noticing that there are these little tooth marks where they're actually eating the algae, and that if you begin to attune to this level, whether it's with individuals or with something like that, as you say, I think you put it there, that it's actually that the environment is communicating with you. And that is actually the natural human condition. And I think to be divorced from that leads to, well, let's say poor mental health. We know that we've got a loneliness epidemic, and particularly in men, young men. And this is something we could maybe go into in another podcast, because I think I'm actually thinking about doing a whole series on this, because I think it's become one of the sort of epidemics of our time. You are dealing with severely lonely people. Most of them, many of them male, but this attunement and being able to help people attune with the environment back to, you say, I'll take them into nature. How do you help them without it being like, do you notice the tree and how it's moving? Without sounding kind of like this is forced fun now or something, where people just can automatically rebel against that. How do you help people with this kind of despair and loneliness find this attunement, and what effects do you notice?
Yeah. I mean, so how we learn attunement, like how we learn to be connected to ourselves and to feel our emotions and express them and all of these, like we're supposed to learn that from our parents in childhood, right? And so we start learning it in infancy, when our parents kind of like respond to our needs.
Sure.
And show us even kind of like that back and forth, like smiling back and forth with your child kind of kickstarts that part of your brain. It's like the right frontal lobe that is where we do a lot of that connection. And so when I am practicing in a very intentional way that attunement with the people I work with, they are like learning it from me, they're just absorbing it. And I will often kind of narrate what I see. So I'm not like teaching them or telling them something, but I am maybe observing, like, oh, I just noticed that you are like holding your breath and you seem really tense right now. Are you feeling a little anxious about something? I might you have to stay more in like curiosity than telling. So I might just like very curiously observe, like, are you a little worried about this? Or I notice, oh, hey, like, I remember working with one guy who was totally in his own world, staring into space. And I was just kind of like, what's he looking at? And I noticed, oh, he's looking at like the clouds over there. So I was just like, there's some interesting clouds, kind of dark. Maybe it's going to rain, And he's like, yeah, I think it might rain. And that was actually a reality-based response to me that he gave, that he was actually, before that, it was like there was nothing, And that was kind of my in, right? So you're kind of just looking for your way in to further that connection. And I've had these experiences, like walking in nature, and things will just kind of come up, like we'll run into a little woolly bear caterpillar, and it'll turn into this whole conversation about their childhood and their mother, who had different superstitions about, the caterpillar bands and what that means. And I've even had like, I would, just like really beautiful moments of like, I was walking with this man who also very disconnected from reality. And we're walking, and like all of a sudden these little butterflies come and just kind of like spiral around us. And it's just like this little moment of joy that then I can kind of like refer back to at different times to kind of like build that sense of connection. But you're really just really trying to stay present and in the moment and ready for like whatever opportunities come up to help them connect to themselves and connect to the environment outside of them, and like connect to me, because a lot of these mental health conditions are really just like problems of like disconnection. They're disconnected from their own emotional experiences. They're disconnected from other people. They're disconnected from the world around them. And using like movement in nature, and you can, if you think about, like, I've learned a little bit about even like EMDR and processing trauma just through eyes moving from left to right to left to right. It's like integrating the right and left hemispheres of the brain. And I can incorporate that if we're walking outside in nature just by being like, oh, look, there's a bird over there. Or look, there's the cloud over there. Let's look at the colors of the trees. And I can guide that to look to the right and look to the left. And they don't even know that's what I'm doing,
Not everyone who's listening will know what EMDR is, and I think it's fascinating. I've had a little bit of it myself, and it absolutely healed a trauma that I had in about 10 minutes. It was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to, just for the listeners that aren't familiar with it, can you just walk us through what that is?
Yeah, it's a trauma tool. It's like very, very well established for healing, especially kind of those like, especially the shock traumas, or like if you've had like a one traumatic event that gets kind of lodged in the brain and the body. And it started with a psychologist, I think, noticing that when someone was processing something, their eyes were kind of moving from right to left and right to left. And from that developed this whole modality where someone can be kind of, even, they don't necessarily even have to be talking about the trauma. They can just be kind of thinking about it internally, but shifting their eyes from left to right. And now there's even tapping the left side and right side of the body that people will do, or there's even like a musical modality where they listen to headphones, a tone left and right. But there's something about the activation of the different hemispheres and the different sides of the brain with the trauma processing that just speeds along the ability of the brain to like integrate that trauma and process it through. Yeah.
Eye movement desensitization and processing, EMDR.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can sort of you can incorporate that into a nature walk by guiding the movement of their eyes.
And even, when somebody is in a little bit more of like a freeze state, their eyes just naturally kind of lock and they
Mhm.
don't really scan their environment much. Like everything is just kind of rigid and stiff. And I can see it in the way they move and I can see it in their posture. And in just kind of a playful, fun way, I can shift them out of that state by looking around, or even like I will loosen up the way I walk. And maybe I'll say, like, "Ooh, you're like not looking where you're going. Like, let's look out for trees. Let's look out for what we're doing, and then that might kind of create a little bit of a shift in their nervous system. And I've actually seen really, really massive, powerful shifts in people's engagement and in their posture and the way they move, and then in the way they kind of are able to do lots of other things. There's this like reciprocal mirroring between people's kind of emotional states and then their bodies, the way their bodies present. And you can kind of like come from, it's like there's this idea of like top down processing and bottom up. And the top down would be trying to like manage the thoughts and manage the ideas like in their head. And there's like different therapy modalities that do that, like sit in an office and like talk about it, cognitive behavioral therapy. Or you can come from the bottom up and you can try to facilitate more space in their system through like movement, and that sometimes shifts things more powerfully emotionally than trying to come in through the intellect. And for a lot of the people that I work with, they don't have the intellect isn't there. That foundation isn't really there to begin with because they have an intellectual disability, or, they're just not in a space because of their trauma or their amygdala being activated where they're going to like be able to like cognitively process through things. And so you have to come at it from a different angle.
It's interesting. There seem to be quite a lot of studies at the moment coming out that cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, works perhaps quite well for certain populations, but not for others. And it seems that men, and particularly young men, do not really respond to it that well. And this is now, it's just interesting. It seems a number of studies are coming out. And I certainly know from my own point of view that when I had anything like that, it just felt awful. It just felt like I was a dog that had done a doo-doo on the floor and was having my nose rubbed in it, it's made me want to jump off a bridge, But, and of course, as we now know with the science of movement, this protein in the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, as the neuroscientists call it, which sort of changes your brain chemistry, your brain structure, opens up your intellect, makes you, sort of cognitively optimal. Movement is key for this. And of course, young men in particular, are very physical creatures. I'm not saying all genders are not, but it seems to be particularly acute with that population. Was there a moment when you realized, oh my gosh, yes, movement's the key? And I mean, obviously you're an occupational therapist, so it comes a little bit with the territory, but obviously you must have also tried to talk with people in that more top-down way. At what point do you think it really became clear to you that, yeah, it's movement?
I mean, I think I've always been really fascinated with movement. And I think that when I came into the mental health world, I started more in the physical disability world. The first 6 years of my career was more in like rehabilitation. And I did a lot with neuro rehabilitation for people who'd had strokes and things. So I did neurodevelopmental training, which is a lot of facilitating movement and getting muscles to move that haven't moved before and things like that. And then sensory integration, which that is all about movement. Like when you think about the sensory systems, when we learn sensory integration, when you're actually doing it, it's foundational that you are moving and activating like deep pressure, the vestibular system, like the sense of balance, and proprioception, which is your sense of body awareness in space. And it's not sensory integration if you're not integrating some other sense with those foundational senses, because they give you a sense of security, safety, and who you are in the world. And that was a little bit my background coming into mental health. So I was already really fascinated with how those concepts played into mental health and the psychiatric conditions that I was seeing. And then when I was working with people, I just saw movement challenges everywhere, and I think that as an OT, I was a little uniquely positioned to know what I was looking at, because I would see somebody as being very challenged with their coordination and their motor planning, and they're spilling their food and they're having trouble holding their spoon and they're kind of slouched. And I asked the staff, what do you think's going on with this person? And they were like, well, I just thought they were lazy. And, for me, I'm like, they are dyspraxic, which is like somebody who just doesn't have an awareness of their body in space. Or people are labeled as having boundary issues because they are walking up and talking to you really close and getting in your personal space. But what I would see was that they just don't have a good sense of their body's position in space. I would see a lot of asymmetries in posture or just collapsed postures, low muscle tone, and so I was just really, really fascinated about what's going on with all that, because they don't have a physical disability. They have a psychiatric diagnosis. And how is this what's being mirrored in their neurobiology? And I've in different learnings and research and courses I've taken, I feel like I have really, really evolved in my understanding of how all of those things interplay and what's showing up for people and how to kind of read it and work with it. But I think it's kind of a newer, growing area of understanding, because when I first started in this field 10 years ago, I couldn't find anything. All the research and everything was just with kids, kids with autism and not adults, and not adults with other neuropsychiatric conditions. So that, that's part of why I was so fascinated with things like movement method. I was fascinated with anything that would talk about movement with autism or other mental health conditions, because I feel like it's an area that's still not very well understood.
We touched on your relationship with your horse and how you use that for your own resilience, how it's also helped you with attunement to attune to the populations that you work with. We've also talked about nature. We've talked about movement. Obviously, working with animals, obviously working with large animals, obviously particularly working with something like a horse, presumably brings all of these things together, synthesized.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had a chance, and obviously these facilities are not equine, but have you had a chance to bring that into the work with some of your population? If so, could you talk to us about how and your ideas for developing this a little bit?
Yeah. So we do have a partnership with a therapy barn where we could create a little group. I'll bring a group from one of the programs I go to, which is a pretty cool program. It's one of our more intensive programs. Men and women, a lot of them have a pretty significant cognitive impairments, but also psychiatric conditions, challenging behaviors, and really high staffing ratios, really small homes. So a lot of support. And so I will bring a group of them out to this farm, and they will do a little bit of work for about a half an hour. So they'll help clean the pastures, or maybe they'll give a horse a bath or clean tack. And then they get to ride. They have these great big draft horses, and, really, really calm. And they kind of just give them a pony ride, or take them on, they have some trails. So they'll take them on the trails, and it's nothing too elaborate, but it has been great for them. I never have any behavioral challenges when we take them there.
That's
They
interesting.
feel, yeah, yeah.
Why? Why?
You know, I think they're all just so engaged and interested in what they're doing, and they feel like they have this like sense of purpose, and they're excited to be there. And yeah, they're just like, there's nothing going on that is gonna like trigger their particular challenge. And you know, I'll have people that need more support, and I certainly
You
do
won't have
have to be
psychotic projection, for
proactive.
example. Like, I
Mm-mm.
don't think this horse likes me, or the crows over there are saying bad things about me. I use that one because I actually know someone who has that particular psychosis about crows.
Mm-mm.
Did you find that that actually quietens
Yeah,
equine therapy?
yeah, yeah. And I have brought people there who do struggle with those kinds of challenges, and that's not really, they have like the best time there.
Well, what's special about the horse?
Well, I mean, I think we know like that the horses do like project kind of calm, and they have their, you know, large electromagnetic field from their heart, you know, that is very regulating. I think they elicit a kind of respect from a lot of our people. I think that they are more apt to actually be motivated to like follow safety rules and policies and things like that, because they
Because it's
actually,
really a
there's
large
this really
animal.
large animal.
Yeah.
And it's so funny, we had one guy we would bring who's like a pretty big dude, pretty like rough and tumble big guy, and he was really scared, like really scared of the horses. He actually didn't come back, and he was even the mini, we'd get out a mini horse, and that was he was just intimidated and scared. Some of like the biggest, most heavy hitting people have like the most fear, honestly. But yeah, yeah. I think I have people, it's like the middle of winter right now, and we're not really going for like a month while it's, you know, 5 degrees outside. And everyone's still bugging me about wanting to go, because I think they don't often get to feel like they are productive or giving back, or that they are, you know, like really contributing to something. And I think that's something that is really lacking for this group of people. It's, you know, the in the mental health lingo, they're labeled as consumers, is like what they get called, because they consume mental health resources. And I really hate that term, because it just kind of puts them in this position that they just take, and they have nothing to give. And I think it's really important for people to feel like they have something to give. And so having them come and like feel like they're taking care of the horses, and then they get to ride. And I've seen like wild, I had another person with this very like strange posture. They were like very, very crooked, and for like there's no medical reason. Um, but when they got on the horse, they're just completely straight and aligned. And I could use that body sensation later on. We could talk about it and be like, hey, remember what it felt like, you know, when you were on the horse? Can you kind of like find that feeling again? And they could kind of straighten up, and like we could kind of use that new sense in their body of like what straight felt like to like bring that forward into their life. And now they're straight, actually.
It's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously, my story, my work, you know, with horses, it's time and time again we've seen things that one regards as miraculous, but happen so often that we have to then start saying, well, is it a miracle, or is it actually just the product of, as you say, electromagnetic resonance of the heart, you know, production of certain hormones, oxytocin, etc., BDNF in the brain, but all coming together in a perfect cocktail in the right sensory environment. A lot of studies have also shown that when people engage in animal assisted therapies, they tend to finish the program because they have a relationship with the animal and they want to keep coming back. It can also be with dogs, for example, but particularly with equine, it seems that horses, I guess they're so beautiful aesthetically, they make us feel good in a way that I think very few other animals, in this idea that they carry us maybe. you know Kes Sullivan, the University of Bournemouth, she's affiliated there, researcher. They did a study that in domestic violence, people who had been perpetrators of domestic violence going to equine assisted programs, not only finishing the program, but apparently a 51% reduction in domestic violence, even 1 year after the program had ended. So it does seem that there's a massively still to be properly explored in here within mental health. Can you yourself, I mean, you have a certain amount of autonomy in your job. You are looking after quite a few facilities. You're traveling between them. People are listening to you to some degree. Have you got plans to develop more the nature, the art, the equine? Where's it going?
Yeah, I feel like I've been doing this long enough now that I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what you get the most bang for your buck, in terms of like programming and like implementing and scaling things. Because I'm always thinking about how to be as effective as I can, because I do cover like a lot of programs and I can only do so much, like working one-on-one with people. And I really find like trying to support the staff in these programs is really, really important. They are the ones that are that like source of relationship for the people in the programs, and they really create a lot of the culture. And I've seen really good staff be the source of like so much progress and healing for people. And then I've seen staff just completely torpedo people's progress. And I do like, I have a really, really a lot of compassion and care for the people that I work with, but also for like the people that are supporting them, because it's a really, really hard job and they're not given a lot of resources. They're kind of expected to be the Band-Aid on a really broken system. And they're kind of like sandwiched in the middle of these really, really challenging, residents, and then a system that is like always more and more demanding. So like finding ways to support the staff so that they can support the people that they work with, I think is like something I really, really would like to develop and do. Ideally, I would love all the staff to be able to like go do an attunement workshop, and like learn like how to like really embody it, because I think that if you can kind of work from that kind of a space, it actually like prevents burnout too, because you're not always like controlling and resisting. And it's, I think that would be a really nice thing to be able to give people. And yeah, like being able to really look at the environments, look at bringing in more nature, I think a lot of the groups and things still tend to be very cognitive. And I would love to see more intentionality in the programs around designing groups and activities for the residents that are more like humanity building, like more music groups, more just group dancing, more drumming, more just things that we know like promote a good, healthy nervous system and connection and all of that stuff without it feeling like a therapy group. So I'm kind of working to try to build those into different programs that are open to it. So stuff like that. More awareness for staff, more training. A lot of them come in from like a high school diploma, or it's their first job, or maybe they worked in like a factory and it's kind of a low bar of entry and not the highest paying, and it's just not a very valued job in our economy, but it's actually highly requires a high degree of skill. I mean, if you think about it, to do
Undervalued
it
people
well.
looking after other undervalued people.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
As you talk, and it's interesting because we're approaching now, I think we're probably just over the 2 hour mark, and I could keep going. And I think I'm going to have to ask you to come back on actually. And there's a number of things I think listeners and myself would like to go into more detail on. But what springs to mind as you begin as you're talking now about those systems is those communities and the staff there and the people living in them. It sounds like families. And oftentimes our family dynamics are not as functional as they could be. Let's say you switched hats and you became a family therapist, having brought in the insights of working at this high stakes type human community environment. What are like the 5, count them on your fingers, type things that all of us who are parents, who are spouses, who are kids ourselves to older parents, what are the things that you feel if everybody did, it would just ease everybody's life? What are those things?
Well, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is that idea of really radical acceptance and just letting people be who they are. And I think that is something I think about that a lot as a parent, and thinking about how I was parented to kind of be molded in a certain direction, but instead to look at it as I'm in a parent as a way to kind of just discover who this person is and help them be more of who they are, and just celebrate what we all discover together, taking that attitude of like, or I guess looking at what your expectations are and what your judgments are about what this person should be, who they are, what their life should look like, and being able to just really radically let go of that and just see who this person is that's kind of creating themselves in front of you, is something that I think, you know, will feel very, very, very freeing and validating to the person that is like on the receiving end of that. Something I wish I would have had. And I think, you know, and I do try to do that for the people I'm working with. I try not to bring my judgments and my notions about who they are and who they should be and where they should be at. You know, I think when you get into that mindset of where you should be, that kind of puts you in this like frozen state of immobility. Like you can't really move forward from there. You have to be totally accepting of where things are before you can take those next steps of moving on from there. So I think a lot of it is looking at your judgments, looking at your expectations, and being very, very accepting of where things are, and knowing that if you can get to that space, things can actually change really, really fast and really radically in ways that you don't even realize it. I think looking at always trying to look at what's going on underneath the problem or the behavior that you're seeing, that when you're seeing a behavior that's not so nice, you know, or challenging or not so constructive, like getting curious about it, you know, before you just go right to like shaming it or trying to shut it down, looking at it with curiosity and trying to figure out now what's really going on underneath, you know. Is there an underlying stressor, an anxiety, a lack of safety, a lack of connection? You know, there's always something going on under the surface. There's always a reason for it. And sometimes the answer isn't this direct addressing of the behavior, but it's more something else that needs more support or is lacking.
It's funny, one often thinks of family as one's relationship with one's kids. So often we don't do this with our spouses either. You know, we have this kind of, well, you should, you know, you're an intelligent person and you should blah, 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 blah. You know, with our kids, you know, we hopefully anyway, we give them a bit more leeway. But it's so interesting, isn't it, how little we let each other off the hook as spouses when we're actually on this boat together. and supposedly pulling on the same ropes and manning the same rudder and down in the engine room trying to figure out what's up with the boiler. But what I think what you said about radical acceptance is really useful, and I think I would like you to come back on, and I'd like to explore that in greater depth. And I'm hoping that you will begin to run some workshops and some retreats on this concept of radical acceptance. And I will absolutely put my money down and come, because I think you have an unusual set of qualifications to give you those insights, which I think are rare. And I'm going to read you something that you wrote to me.
Gosh. Oh no.
Which I felt, that's why I asked you to come really on the show. I mean, obviously you're awesome, and why would one not want you on the show? But it was back on the 21st of December, actually. And I had been introducing you to a group of people and said, wow, the work she does and the population she works with, it's so extreme. I don't know if I can do it, blah, 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 blah. And, I'd meant that as a compliment. And this is what I mean by how well you handle boundaries. It's very elegant. It made me sit up. And I just want listeners to hear this. It's like, so with your permission, I'm going to read this.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm going to pretend I'm asking you permission. Okay. So you wrote, the way you ask me to explain the folk I work with never quite sits right with me, and I haven't been sure why, but I think I can articulate it, so I'm going to try. Not to make you feel bad at all, more just for my own clarity. I feel like they're being made out to be these monsters, and they're not. They're like the most sensitive, vulnerable of all, and the ones that are paying the cost of an inhumane culture. They're the shadow side, and we are all capable of any of the things they've done, which is why I think they make people really uncomfortable and they get stuck into the margins. Beautiful things can be dangerous and out of control, like a poison plant. But like a poison plant, they still have a place in the world. They just need to be treated with extra care and respect. But they're not monsters. Totally just as human as anyone, and we all have these parts in us. People have a hard time facing that. So the ones who can't hide it get labeled monsters and completely othered. I want to find a way to talk about them that doesn't make them so othered, doesn't make them seem so othered, if that makes sense. I think that was one of the most insightful things anyone has ever written to me, and that I've ever read. And this idea of the poison plant resonated because it's what are poison plants offer but medicine? So many of the medicines that we take are extracted from plants where if we didn't get the dosage right, it could kill us or knock us out or have some very severe effect. But if we can get the dosage right, it's incredibly ameliorative. And in fact, the entire drug industry is based around those plant compounds. So anything that you can think of that's been used as a poison, like hemlock or nightshade or any of these things, are also medicines, very powerful, very good medicines, things that have strong psychoactive effects on us, like datura or ayahuasca or peyote, or these strong hallucinogens that could induce psychosis in the wrong setting, in the wrong environment, if misused, also are incredibly healing. And I think that you're bringing our attention to this population as people that can actually heal us, because it can make us accept those parts of ourselves and not have to other ourselves. I think there's a real merit in that, but it's not talked about because it's outside of our ken. I've also noticed that in the hunter-gatherer communities I've lived in, although you do definitely see psychosis, that psychosis is almost always channeled into healing. So the person with schizophrenia or whatever tends not to do something destructive to the community. Often that person is the shaman. whenever I saw things happening that were destructive to the community, it had always been where people have been displaced and put in, marginal environments and dispossessed and traumatized and given alcohol and, okay. But in the, any of us in that situation do the same thing. But in the right environment, no, the psychosis was actually a mechanism for healing. As we close, can you just give us your thoughts on that, psychosis and healing?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what you just said definitely resonates. And I feel like in a lot of ways, this group of people have been my teachers. I've never had the chance to work with a shaman, or learned from, really, I haven't had these really strong like mentors in this field. I feel like all my learning has been from these people themselves, and they've taught me a lot. I think there's a lot to learn from them if you are in a space where you can hear what they have to teach. And in my experience too, that sensitivity, they are the most sensitive of us. And when I am working with them in a way that honors that and sees that and acknowledges that, and I have this awareness a little bit of like when you're working more from the heart and from understanding like people's energy and connection to the earth, like they really, really resonate with that. I work with people who they're very sensitive to if the lights are on or off or where's the furniture in the room. And they'll talk about things in terms of like good energy and bad energy and their chi and it's perceived as part of their mental illness and their psychosis. But when I'm looking at it, I'm like, but it kind of makes sense, like I know what they're trying to say. I think that there is, even in the most like out of touch, kind of like psychotic sounding statements, there's an underlying sense to it, emotional sense, symbolic sense. And like, I'm not the arbiter of like reality, like I think it's important that we're not always thinking like I'm the one who's right about reality and they're wrong. I think there's these shared realities. There's kind of the general consensus of what reality is. And then there's people that are perceiving things on a very different level and expressing it in a different way. And who's to say that they're not perceiving something that we just can't perceive? There's a lot out there that we don't understand. So yeah, I mean, it's honestly a really beautiful, interesting, lovely group of people to work with and know. And I'm really sad that the general population doesn't get to know these people. And because of confidentiality and privacy and things, I can't give a lot of specific stories because they're such characters and they're such unique, human, real, fabulous people that like any one of you would enjoy. So it's hard for me to be able to explain that without getting into a lot of specific details.
I think listeners just to hear that you say, well, I work with this population every day. Then what they weren't expecting, what none of us would expect to hear is, and they're fabulous people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which we must all be fabulous people. Because if they're fabulous by nature, by definition, by extension, surely, therefore, the rest of us must be. And we all go around beating ourselves up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, we get into this conversation a lot here about self-actualization. And I think there's no question your working life, how it's brought it into your own personal life and so on. I think you are a shining example of someone who's in the process of constant self-actualization. But what's interesting is the people that you're working with, I think we do actually, funnily enough, have a place for the psychotic in our culture, for recognizing self-actualization, if we call it genius. And then you can have someone who's insane. You can have, a Vincent van Gogh, or you can have, I can never remember the name of the high-selling Japanese artist who lives in a lockdown, but they sell, amazing stuff. Or a musician or something in the arts, or a mad scientist or something. But what's interesting to me here is that we sort of reserve that respect for those ones that are so clearly productive in that way. But of course, not everyone can go around being a genius, and not every type of genius is obvious, and not every genius is necessarily productive in that way. Perhaps it might be of comfort and part of a self-actualization process for the people that you work with to know that they help us perhaps to heal ourselves. Might that be worth communicating? And if you're the advocate, if you're the person who can relay that message both to us and to them, when are you going to write a book? Because I haven't read anything like this, and I think this is necessary as, well, what's necessary? An apple tree is necessary, growing a wheat field. But I think it is necessary in terms of, because I also believe that in the culture that we're in, none of us is not mentally ill, because none of us are living in the environment that we're designed for. So how can we not go mad on the stress? It's just that some forms of madness are more
acceptable.
Yeah, can be, let's say, more easily assimilated. But I think we all know we're bonkers, and that there for the grace of God go I feeling. Closing words. Also, you're not at the point, a lot of people I interview, they have websites or, contacting. To my knowledge, you don't. And I don't think you probably want to be giving out your email on the thing. But if people were to contact me, questions, including when is Leana going to run a retreat and training, I will be very happy to relay those. And I think if you would put together some sort of initial retreat or training, here we are. I should date this. We're in February 2025. If you're listening to this 5 years from now, she's probably already a mega celebrity in mental health instead of Leana. But we got here first. So is that how we should do it, do you think?
Yeah, that might be the best. Yeah. I'm still kind of like in the process of figuring out what that all might look like. I get very torn because I feel very committed to the group of people I work with, and I very much feel like I am always going to work with that population. Like, I just would be sad not to. But I also do feel a very strong sense of wanting to share like the things that I've learned, and support the people who are supporting these people, and kind of like spread a better understanding and awareness for them.
Surely one.
Yeah.
What we hope is
but
that
what that looks like.
Lawmaker.
Yeah.
Or at least an advisor to lawmakers.
Yeah. Yep. I would love to support a better world for them, for sure, in any way I can. So, yeah.
Well, Leana, it's been brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I look forward to the
next
conversation. All right, my friend.
All right.
Okay, so,
bye.
So anyone listening, if you want to get in touch with her, contact us. You've got all the email links and website links. And if you want to put your name down for a retreat and training with this clear genius, send it to us. We'll get a group of you together and we'll figure out where to do it. Could be stateside, could be Europe side, could be both. Why not? Okay. All right, we'll come sit at your feet. Okay. Till next time.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for coming on.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine-assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine-assisted field or are considering a career in the equine-assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.